Berlin, 1933. Students with torches storm through a university library. The smell of smoke fills. The air as Nazi propaganda fuels their rage. They're ripping books from shelves, tearing pages, throwing centuries of human knowledge into waiting fires. Un-German literature, Jewish authors, political dissidents, anything that challenged the new order, was marked for destruction. This wasn't just vandalism. This was the systematic erasure of ideas. The fires burned bright across Germany that night, May 10th, 1933. University students, professors, and party officials gathered in public squares from Berlin to Munich. They weren't just burning paper and ink. They were destroying the works of Einstein, Freud, Marx, and thousands of other thinkers whose only offense was offering different ideas. A senior propaganda minister stood before the flames in Berlin's Oberpalast, declaring that an era of certain intellectual influences has come to an end. Over 25,000 books turned to ash in a single evening. The words of Heinrich Heine, written a century earlier, seemed to echo through the smoke. Where they burn books, they will ultimately burn people too. This was only the start. Public book burning became a central part of the regime's agenda, not just erasing knowledge, but reshaping the truth itself. Libraries were cleared, bookstores were emptied, and entire areas of study were labeled unacceptable. But in one university library, where the chaos had just unfolded, a quiet act of resistance was about to begin. Meet Susanne Engelmann, a 45-year-old librarian at Berlin University's library. She wasn't a political activist, wasn't part of any organized resistance, and wasn't even particularly outspoken about her personal views. She was simply a woman who understood that books weren't just objects on shelves. They were vessels of human thought, repositories of everything humanity had learned about itself and its world. On the morning after the book burning, as she walked through her damaged library, Engelmann saw something others didn't. While her colleagues saw loss, she saw possibility. While the authorities claimed success, she saw a challenge. The student groups and uniform patrols had been thorough, but not perfect. In their rush to seize the most visible targets, the books by Jewish authors whose names stood out, and the clearly political works, they had missed others. Some had fallen behind shelves, been overlooked in dim corners, or simply escaped notice in the confusion. And Engelmann began to notice something else. The guards weren't paying much attention to what a middle-aged librarian carried in her lunch basket. What began as a single, almost instinctive act soon became something far more intentional. That first day, she had simply picked up a slim volume of poetry that had fallen behind a radiator and slipped it into her bag without much thought. But as she walked home, the weight of that book against her side felt like hope. The next day, she acted with purpose. A philosophy text tucked beneath her sandwich. A scientific journal rolled inside her thermos sleeve. Each day, she developed new techniques, new hiding spots, and new ways to quietly move books past the watchful eyes of the increasingly attentive guards. Her methods were ingenious in their simplicity. She hollowed out old textbooks to hide smaller volumes inside. She wrapped restricted manuscripts in brown paper and labeled them as personal correspondence. She even enlisted the help of her elderly mother, who would carry books in her shopping bags during visits to the library. But this wasn't just about the act of removing books from the library. Engelmann was making difficult choices every single day. Which books should be rescued first? The rare manuscripts, the children's books that could inspire young minds, the scientific works that might advance human understanding. She created a system. Monday was philosophy day, Tuesday, literature, Wednesday, science, Thursday, history. Friday, anything she could manage to take. Each day brought new risks, new opportunities, and new ethical dilemmas. The guards began to recognize her routine, which was both risky and useful. They expected to see Susanne Engelmann with her lunch basket, walking the same route at the same time. Her predictability became her camouflage. Engelmann's basement became something extraordinary, a secret library quietly operating in the heart of wartime Germany. But this wasn't just a storage room. She organized everything with the same meticulous care she had used in the university library. She created her own cataloging system, keeping detailed records of every book she had saved, where she had found it, and where it originally belonged. She built makeshift shelves from wooden crates and repurposed library furniture. She even maintained stable temperature and humidity conditions to preserve the books, using techniques learned from her professional training. But perhaps most remarkably, she began to loan books out. Yes, you read that right. In a place and time where certain works were forbidden, Susanne Engelmann was quietly running an underground lending library from her basement. She carefully vetted a small network of trusted friends, colleagues, and neighbors, people she knew shared her respect for knowledge and could be trusted to safeguard it. Professor Weber, whose own works had been destroyed, would slip down to her basement to continue his research. Mrs. Klein, a Jewish neighbor who had lost her teaching position, would come to read the children's books she could no longer share with her students. Young Hans, a university student who had declined to join the state youth organization, would study restricted philosophy texts by candlelight. For 12 long years, while the authorities worked to silence these authors and erase their ideas, Engelmann's basement remained a beacon of intellectual freedom. Knowledge that was meant to disappear was not only surviving, it was being shared, discussed, and kept alive. The risks were enormous. Discovery would mean severe punishment, not just for her, but for everyone in her network. Yet they persisted, driven by the belief that ideas were worth protecting at any cost. Living this double life took its toll. Engelmann became skilled at reading people, at sensing when someone might be watching too closely, and at knowing when to abandon a planned book retrieval. She had several close calls that could have ended everything. Once, a new guard decided to inspect her lunch basket. Her heart pounded as he lifted her apple, revealing the corner of a restricted political pamphlet underneath. But her years of practice had taught her to stay calm. She simply smiled and mentioned that she had been saving newspaper clippings about rationing recipes. The guard, more interested in the apple than the papers, waved her through. Another time, a uniformed officer followed her home, suspicious of her regular routine. She led him on a winding route through Berlin streets, stopping at shops, visiting neighbors, making her basement library appear to be just another stop on a series of ordinary errands. The officer eventually lost interest, but Engelmann didn't sleep for 3 days. The psychological strain was immense. She was constantly aware that she was carrying prohibited material, constantly weighing the risks, constantly concerned for the safety of her small circle. Yet she never stopped. Each morning, she would wake up, prepare her lunch, and ask herself the same question: what knowledge can I save today? When Allied forces finally reached Berlin in 1945, Engelmann faced a new dilemma. The war was ending, but her work wasn't finished. The university library lay in ruins, bombed and looted. Many of her colleagues were gone, and the books she had saved were some of the only surviving copies of works that had been deliberately destroyed across much of Europe. But Engelmann didn't hesitate. One by one, book by book, she began the reverse journey. The same lunch basket that had once carried restricted works into hiding now carried them back into the light. Some books returned to the university as it slowly rebuilt. Others went to colleagues who were starting new collections. Many went to displaced persons camps, where survivors of the war were seeking a connection to the intellectual world they had lost. She never made a public announcement or sought recognition. She simply did what librarians do best. She made sure the books found their way to the people who needed them most. When a young American journalist discovered her story months after the war ended, Engelmann was reluctant to talk about it. "I just did my job," she said. "Librarians preserve knowledge. That's what we do." Today, some of the books Susanne Engelmann saved are the only surviving copies of works that would have otherwise been lost. Her basement library preserved not just individual texts, but entire chains of human thought that might have disappeared. But perhaps more importantly, her story reminds us that courage doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes the most meaningful acts come from ordinary people making extraordinary choices when no one is watching. In a world where information can still be restricted, where books can still be removed from shelves, and where knowledge can still be threatened, Susanne Engelmann's lunch basket reminds us that each of us has the power to safeguard what matters. One woman, one basement, thousands of books, and the quiet understanding that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Because in the end, the books endured, the ideas survived, and knowledge, as it so often does, found a way.